Hi, I'm Robert Joseph, and in this video we are going to sample all of the stitches that come with the Brother Sewing Machine LX3817. Now, if you just jumped onto this video, know that there are about 3 videos prior to this one. It's a whole playlist dedicated to Brother Sewing Machine LX3817. So in this video, I'm actually going to be walking you through all the different stitches that it offers. So if you want to go back and learn about the interface and how to thread it and how to wind a bobbin, go back into the top of the playlist, and I have an introduction video, a bobbins and threading video, and a needles video. And then after those 3 videos is where this video comes in, where we're going to explore all of the stitches that come with the sewing machine. So now, before we actually get into checking these stitches, there is one more thing that I want to talk to you about and let you know about, and we're going to practice it right now. So it is this lever right here. So this is our reverse lever, and I've talked about it in the previous videos. There's a little symbol up here with a upside down U with an arrow, and once you depress it, press it down, it clicks, you hold it down, and the machine will sew backward. And then you release it, and it sews forward again. So you will often hear sewing teachers or people who sew will tell you to backstitch at the beginning and the end of your stitch line. And that is to tack those both ends so that the seam does not pull out easily. So we're going to practice that just before I get into the actual samples of the stitches that this machine comes with. So what am I going to do? I'm actually going to set the machine on my number 8 stitch. So remember, there's a little notch up here for you to align the 8 with. So I'm going to use that stitch to actually do practice the back stitching. So in here, I'm going to explain how you properly put the fabric underneath the presser foot, which becomes sandwiched between the presser foot and the feed dogs, which are the rough little metal things underneath the presser foot at the bottom. So those are the things that actually pull the fabric along for your sewing. So one note about the fabric that I'm going to be using, I'm going to be using unbleached muslin, which is just basically a plain weave fabric, and I'm going to be using double layer. So always sew with 2 layers of fabric. It actually makes the machine much happier, and your stitches will actually look much better. Most clothing is not sewn with a single layer. So to make a seam, you actually have 2 layers of fabric that are on top of each other, and then it is sewn, and that creates your seam. Okay, so enough talking. Let's actually get into learning how to use the backstitch lever. Okay, so before we get into using the lever, even though this is not a how-to sewing video, I just want to explain how you get the fabric in here to sew. And I'm just going to sew a straight line to begin with. So first off, I'm going to pop this foot off. You saw me do that in the previous video. So these are little rough edges, and these are called the feed dogs. And this is what actually pulls your fabric through the fabric. And along with the presser foot, let me get this back on here. Once the presser foot is pushed against those, it creates the pressure that actually pulls everything along here with the feed dogs. So that's kind of how the sewing machine works, basically. So to start, I'm going to flip this around because you can see the cut edge of the fabric here. I have 2 layers of fabric here, and put them close together like that. What I don't want you to do is I don't want you to start right here. So a lot of people, beginners, and I know I don't want to call people out, but it's not a good idea to start right here at the edge, because sometimes what happens when your needle comes down, I'll just show you that, if your needle isn't sharp enough, or if it's a ballpoint needle, and just sometimes generally, it will push the fabric down into that hole, and then it will cause the thread to wad up, and then you have a mess, and you get discouraged, and you don't want to continue learning to sew. So let's avoid that. So for absolute beginners, my suggestion is take this fabric and get it all the way in there and push it all the way back to the back of the machine where the machine edge finishes. That way, you know, you definitely have enough fabric behind the foot and in front of the foot, okay? So that just means that you need a decent length of fabric to start with. Okay, so I'm going to do that, and I'm going to kind of start over here to the edge instead of the middle, because I'm going to do another line when we actually start working with the lever, the reverse lever. So I'm going to push this all the way to the back, and now I have enough fabric all the way around. I don't have to worry about anything. The first thing I like to do is I like to put the needle down instead of putting the foot down first. So the reason I like to do that is because if I put the foot down, you see how it's grabbing the thread there, it's holding the thread there. Sometimes you need, sometimes the thread needs to come up here if your take-up lever is not all the way up, and I had a little conversation with you about that in the previous videos. So I like to start with the presser foot up, and then I like to put the needle all the way down using the hand wheel. I'll put it down, and that helps me align everything. Say if I had a line, which I'm going to be drawing lines on fabric for the seams coming up, I can actually see whether or not I'm lining that needle up on that line. So put the needle down, and then I'm going to put the presser foot down. And remember, I'm using the number 8 stitch right now. That's a decent, medium-sized stitch. And I'm just going to sew a seam. I'm going to sew a line of stitching. So this is a good way for you to practice getting used to controlling your foot pedal, which is on the floor, and with the speed. So you're going to press just lightly. You'll hear the machine engine start up, and then press a little bit further, and the sewing will begin. And then you'll have to practice your speed with pressing the foot lever more or less to control it. Okay, so I'm going to stop here. Actually, let me see if I can get the needle to go down. Okay, so just for an example, if your needle stops like this and the needle is down, you need to bring the needle all the way back up. Remember about the take-up lever? So I need to turn my hand wheel with that and match that line up to the seam on the side that I showed you in the previous videos. So I'm going to turn the wheel toward me and match the line on the wheel to the line or seam on the machine, and the needle is now all the way up. So now I can lift the presser foot and take the fabric out, okay? And then I'm gonna make sure these don't get caught up there. Okay, so there's my stitch, my very first stitch that I made. It looks good on the front, and it looks good on the back. All right, so now and then make sure all your threads here are nice and neat and to the back, and that will get you ready for the next little bit. And now we're actually going to practice with the reverse lever. Okay, so now we're going to practice with the reverse lever. We did this line just now, so I'm going to put the fabric in exactly the same way, just kind of in the middle somewhere there. So I'm going to get ready to sew just like I did before. So I'm going to put the needle down. Right, it's down. Now I'm going to put the presser foot down. And now I'm going to bring my hand over here with my fingers and getting ready to depress this. Okay, I'm going to do this before I sew. So this is pressing it. So you may like 2 fingers. So this will take a little bit of hand, eye, and foot coordination. Your foot, because you're going to be pressing the foot pedal to control the sewing on the machine. Okay, so all we need to do is sew a little bit, then I'm going to hit the reverse lever, let go, and go forward again. So I only want to backstitch, you know, a few stitches, and then go again, and I'm going to practice again, and we'll do that a few times. Okay, so getting ready to sew and sewing. Okay, let's backstitch, down, release, sew again, press and release. We'll do it a couple more times. Press and release. And then we're going to come up here, try to match this here. So press and release, and we've stopped. Now, even though the needle has stopped up in the top position, just make sure with your hand wheel that that is really all the way up. Okay, and it is. So I'm going to take that out, cut my threads, and there is our backstitching. Okay, exercise, practice. So here are our back stitches There's 1, 2, 3. We did 4 attempts at backstitching. That was pretty good. Now, if yours comes over to the side and it's not on top of mine just like this, don't compare yours to mine. I've been sewing for quite a few years, so you just need a little bit more practice. And this is a good thing to practice, especially with the reverse lever, because it's kind of like playing the piano a little bit. You have to be able to control both your left and right hands doing different things. So just be aware of that. So whoops, I hit the camera. So just practice that a little bit. And you'll get really good at reverse levering. And just remember, you're going to want to backstitch at the beginning, and I'll kind of show you what that is looks like. So if I do this and I'm sewing a seam, so basically I'm going to sew a couple of stitches, backstitch a couple of stitches, and then sew my seam and then end it. So if this were a real seam, then I would sew like this. And I'm coming up to the end of my seam. Okay, and you see how little amount that I actually backstitched? So right here on the end, that tiny little bit, and the top here, that tiny little bit. That's all you need. But we wanted to practice this. But also, this could be a decorative style of stitching if you had a nice variegated thread, which is a color changing thread. So okay, so we've practiced our reverse lever stitching, which we will need. I don't think I actually use this in the next videos, but it will come in handy and you'll be using that a lot in your sewing. All right, so now we can get to sampling the rest of the stitches on the machine. Okay, so we're ready to start checking out the different stitches on the dial. And as I mentioned before, I have some muslin here. This is just unbleached muslin, and I've got 2 layers. So you want to sew with 2 layers because you want to make sure that the fabric that you're working with isn't too light. And sometimes with a single layer, you can kind of see through this, a single layer may not be strong enough to hold the stitches together. And most of the time when you're sewing, you're going to have 2 layers, and that actually makes a seam. So, and you can see that I've drawn my lines here, and this is erasable marking pen. It comes off with the iron with heat. And that's where I'm going to sew along as a guide. Okay, so I'm going to switch up my dial here. Let me just move the camera so you can see me switching the dial. I don't want to move the tripod, so let me just take the camera out. Okay, so now you see the notch, and I had it set here. Whoops, I had it set here on 8. So I need to switch that over, and I'm going to do the 2. We're not going to start with 1. As I mentioned before, this is the buttonhole, how to make the buttonhole, and so this is going to be a whole separate tutorial about how to use this particular buttonhole option here. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to switch this over to the 2. And then we'll go into the 3 and the 4, and then we'll look at the applique satin stitches here at 5. Okay, so I've got it here on 2. I'm going to set the camera back on the tripod and get everything lined up here. Okay, so we are actually recording this time. So the camera stopped recording for some reason as soon as I put this the fabric into the machine. So that's why I already have this row. And this zigzag stitch is actually pretty tiny. So you didn't get to hear my commentary as I was sewing. But this is, if you have a small little cording or piping, you could actually use this to cover that as you're stitching a design. Maybe I'll do a video tutorial on how to do that. And I pulled my thread. Let me pull the thread back out. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to actually do another row of this right next door to this stitching, so you can actually see me stitching this stitch. So we are set at number 2. I haven't changed anything about the machine. So I'm going to get right next to it. I think I will ride this right next to the edge of the presser foot as a guide. So I'm going to at the top, and you didn't hear me say before, but if I had a line here, I could put the needle down into the fabric, and then I could just kind of lift this up to see if the needle was actually right on that line. It gives me a little wiggle room, and that's why I like to put the needle down first, and then I will, well, that's not a little, I want to make sure that I see this on the side. So put the needle down first, and then I put the presser foot down, and now I'm ready to sew. And I'm going to actually backstitch. I'm not going to show you over here me pressing it down like I did before, because you've already seen that. So I'm just going to sew a couple of stitches, press the reverse button, and release it after the couple stitches, and then we'll be on our way with sewing. Now this is a great exercise with all of these stitches. More practice on controlling your foot pedal and how far you press it down to go faster. So you can practice that at the same time. Okay, so I'm going to go a couple of stitches and then backstitch and then continue the line of sewing. So I'm going pretty slow, and my hands are just here. You see if I let go of it, it kind of veers over this way. So I just kind of move it back in line, and that's what it does. So I'm going to press a little bit further on the pedal to go a little bit faster. Now you don't want to go really, really fast because the machine will go up and down. I think I will show you what that does. Well, I have a really good sturdy table. It doesn't move a whole lot, but that's all the way down my presser foot, so that's pretty good. So I like to go at a medium pace. I'm coming up here to the end, so I'm gonna get ready over here to backstitch, go a little bit slower and backstitch, and then come back to the end of my stitching. My needle is down, I stopped down, so that means I have to turn the hand wheel over to the right toward myself until the needle, the take-up lever, and the line on the wheel are in the correct spots. So my take lever is now up to the top, and the line on my machine matches the seam in the machine on the side. And my needle looks like it's in the correct position. So now I can lift the presser foot, pull this out. I'm going to use the knife on the side to cut those threads. And there is our small zigzag stitch. That could actually be really great for a decorative thing on like a collar or a cuff, especially if you use different color threads, okay? So now we're going to do the number 3 stitch. And I'm gonna actually just trim as I go. So I have the habit of not trimming as I go. Oh look, that's kind of a mess up. So I think the thread, there was too much thread at the top here, and the bobbin wasn't quite ready, so I should have probably pulled the thread out just to make sure there wasn't an extra tangle of thread under here like that. Sometimes your thread can end up kind of like that, and then the thread, whoops, you can't see that, and then you can't really, the thread goes down and gets kind of wadded up underneath. So that's why I really should have pulled these straight back and kind of held it with my fingers before I sewed. So I can just trim that up and get that done. So there we go. I'll just set that here for right now. We'll put that in the right position in just a second. So I'm going to show you now that I'm switching to, I'm going to switch this, it's on 2, I'm going to switch it to 3, which the zigzag stitch should be a little bit longer and wider. And again, I'm going to line my second line up with my needle. And again, if I put my needle down first, I can kind of peek under here. Am I in line? It looks pretty good. And again, I want to make sure that I've got these threads behind here. Put the presser foot down. I'm going to hold on to that thread before I start. You got to do a lot of things with both your left and right hands. Okay, so I'm a number 3. I'm going to stitch a couple stitches, back stitch, and then continue the sew. Okay. Just guiding the fabric. I'm going to go a little bit faster. And then I'm coming up to the end. I'm going to slow down a little bit, get ready to backstitch, backstitch, all right, and then bring that needle all the way up, and the take-up lever is up, lift the presser foot, and cut the thread. And there is our second one. Now, compared to the first, it's much larger. I don't know if it's twice the size, but maybe it's a third of the size larger. All right, so that could also be used for a decorative stitch. So now let's do number 4. Put that in, get ready. I'll show you I'm switching to number 4. And this is going to be a much larger zigzag stitch. Pull these threads back, get it started the same way. Now this is still in a zigzag stitch. That's why the needle is not in the center. I should have mentioned that before. So when you put the needle down, you're not going to actually be on that line. You can do that if you want to, but I'm going to line this line up with my little line here that's on my presser foot. And then I'm going to put the needle down. And I can just kind of judge now my stitches are going to go back and forth over this line. Presser foot down, stitch a couple stitches, backstitch, and continue to sew. And just guide that fabric. Again, there's no real weight on my hands. I'm just guiding the fabric, coming up to the end. And I didn't even slow down for that. Bring the needle all the way up and release and cut. So now if we look at all 3 of these stitches, they're very different in size. So something like this zigzag or this zigzag is maybe I would do a simple seam finish on a short seam. That's what can be used, although they do have an overcast, which we will get to that as well. So these are our 3 main zigzag stitches. So now we're going to go over and look at our what they're calling the satin stitches, which is number 5. Okay, so let's get that switched up. And let's actually have a look at those really quickly. So I'm going to switch. So remember, so we're at 4 right now. And I'm going to switch over here to 5, but there are 3 widths and lengths here in the 5. So when I switch it over here, matching up this notch, it kind of goes to this first one. And then there's no, like, you see how it clicks over from 4 to 5? In the 3 satin stitches to 5, there's no real clicking, but it's just kind of like a weird movement thing. So we're going to check these out and see. Oh, maybe there is. So there is. I didn't notice that before because I did it really quickly. Okay, so there is. So that's something I just learned about this machine. So I'm going to click over from 4 to 5, but within 5 there are also little clicks. So that would be this stitch all the way over. Then there's a middle click, which is this zigzag stitch, and then the first one is a very tight one. So I don't have 3 lines on my fabric here, so I'm going to do the middle one in the middle of the 2 lines. So I just learned something about the machine, that there is a click. They should have just numbered those maybe 5A, 5B, and 5C, because they're considering them all satin stitches, and satin stitches are just closer together zigzag stitches. All right, so we're going to do the first number 5. I'm going to move this pin. Okay, again, I'm lining my line up with the notch here on the foot. Pull these threads to the back. I'm going to put the needle down. We are on the first satin stitch. Now with this kind of stitch, we don't necessarily need to do a back stitch, so I'm not going to do a very long one. I'm just going to do like 1 or 2 stitches, okay? So, okay. Now notice that it's not taking the fabric very much. That means that we're doing very, very tight and short stitches, which means you may need to change up, and I don't, yikes. Okay, So there was a little bit of a... Okay, so we may need to change our tension because the top part may be too tight. So we're going to actually continue this without messing with the tension because I don't really like to mess with the tension. But you will see what happens. I may do halfway and then show you. Okay, so I'm going at a moderate speed. I'm going to try to speed up here. The thing about this stitch that you have to worry about is that if your fabric is too heavy or too thick or sometimes too light, it's not going to take the fabric. It's not going to move it through the machine. It's just going to push all this fabric down inside, or there won't be enough pressure between the presser foot and the feed dogs to actually move the thicker, heavier fabric. So I'm about halfway. I'm going to take this out so we can actually look at it really quick. Whoops. Okay, so this is what our satin stitch looks like. Okay, and I feel like we look at the back. I mean, it looks okay. But I feel like it's wanting to pull this fabric together. If you can see, I know it looks like the dark line that I drew. Let me see if I can get this to focus. Okay, there we go. So if you can kind of see the fabric is buckling here a little bit, that means that our top tension may be a little bit snug. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen the top tension just slightly, see if it will sew a little bit flatter. So I'm going to put this in. Let me trim off. Oh, there, I didn't realize that. You can actually see it's kind of puckering right here where that fabric is being pulled over this way. So we kind of want to avoid that. So let's see if we can loosen the tension up a little bit. I'm going to clip these threads. I have some other threads in the back here. Okay, so I'm going to move the threads back, and then I'm going to kind of, let's go a little bit a ways from where we were so we can actually see, get that to focus, see the difference, okay? So I'm going to move up here, and so I have the notch here, which is at 4, and I'm going to switch it, actually I'm going to take it all the way down to 3. That's at 3 now with that notch, and we'll see how that does. And with tension, you'll just have to play with it to find a happy medium. Now, if the 3 works, it works on this fabric. So if you have another fabric, you're going to have to test out that tension as well, okay? So I'm going to put my needle down, presser foot down, backstitch, and now I'm going to sew. I'm going to go a little bit faster. The speed that you do these types of stitches will also dictate some of the puckering if it does pucker. So this is a fairly fast sewing speed for the satin stitch. Of course, if you were doing an applique, you wouldn't, I'm going to pull this pin out because I don't want it to hit the foot. If you were doing applique, you wouldn't be able to go this fast because you would be moving around, unless you were really good. I don't do a lot of applique. So I'm getting ready to backstitch just real quick. Okay, and then, whoops, I did not remember to bring the take-up lever all the way up to the top. So I'm going to actually put my presser foot down and do that now. Now everything is in alignment. Now I can pull it out. Okay, so let's have a look at the bottom one here. So that looks a lot flatter. It looks like it's still pulling a little bit, but not as much as the top. You can see down here, see here on this one, there's a little bit of a pucker here at the bottom, whereas the... Okay, so my camera's being kind of weird. It's just deciding to stop recording. So if you see it's kind of choppy, that's kind of why. So I just was actually just talking about the puckering of this on here. On the first one, it kind of puckers a little bit. But down here at the bottom, it doesn't really pucker as much. And that is because we switched the tension up to the 3. Now, on your fabric, you may or may not need to switch the tension. I generally don't like to mess with the tension if it's good, and then we just keep it there. So, but I'm going to keep it at 3 for the rest of the satin stitches. So I'm going to actually, let's switch up the stitch really quick. So I'm going to take this out so you can see me switching. So right now, let me pull it back. I had it sit on this very tight one right up here. And so I'm just going to do one small little click, and that puts it here for the middle satin stitch here. So well, let me get this back on the tripod and lined up there so you can kind of see. All right. Okay, so we're going to start, and I'm going to put the presser foot, the needle, right in between these two lines. All right, so here I am. I'm going to pull this thread here, back here, put the needle down. I'm just trying to make it even with here. Now I'm not going to stop halfway. I'm going to see what we get doing the entire line. All right, so I am going to backstitch just after a couple of stitches. So this is a pretty decent speed. I don't know that I would want to go this much faster. Now these stitches, even if you aren't doing applique, you could use these stitches as decorative as well. If you had some really bright variegated colored thread, that would be kind of fun because you would see the variegation happen rather quickly in this satin stitch. Variegation just means that the thread changes colors variably throughout the thread. So I'm coming up here to the end. I'm going to get ready to backstitch, and I'm just, the machine is pulling the fabric, so that's my hands are there. Backstitch, and make sure that everything is the correct position to pull out of the machine. Okay. And there we have the second satin stitch. So it has a little bit more openness, where this one is very tight, even though down here we can look at the same tension here. So it's a little bit more open. So if you had a heavier or a more fabric with a pile on it, that means that it kind of looks like carpet on the top. That means that the threads have been cut on the top of the fabric to make it furry a little bit. You might want to use this one so that the needle doesn't get stopped or your thread doesn't break. But anyway, it's just a little bit more open. So let's do the last of the 5s. All right, so we're going to switch it over here to this third one, which is just a small click right there. And we'll see what the width of that is. Okay, everything's lined up. We're okay. So put this in the machine here. Oops, I didn't trim my thread. I'll make sure that everything is back behind. So I'm lining up that little notch with the line, and I'm going to put the needle down, presser foot down, and make sure all my threads are back here. I'm going to hold my finger on my threads, and then I'm going to actually sew and then backstitch. And I'm on that third satin stitch, so I'm just going to follow the line down. And it actually looks, I can feel that it's, pulling the fabric faster, which means there's more space between the stitches. So if you were, doing letters or something, even something with a heavier fabric, this might be an option. Say you wanted to use this for decorative stitching on a collar or a cuff, this would be probably the width you would want to use. And now I'm going to backstitch, but I'm going to stop because one of the things you may have noticed that I didn't point out before is when you're doing these zigzag or the the satin stitches, when you backstitch, it backstitches longer than the length of the stitch. So it backstitches at about the 3 or the 4 regular zigzag stitch, and the reason for that is so that the stitches don't pile up on each other and cause a ball of thread underneath the fabric that you can't pull out. So it just means they make it a longer stitch so that the stitches don't get messed up, basically. So I'm going to stitch a couple and then back stitch, and you can see that it went back faster than it did the regular stitches. Okay, so I'm going to make sure everything is in the proper position before I lift the presser foot, pull that out, trim those threads. So let's have a look at the difference here. So this is the third of the 5 stitches, which has much more openness to it. The second of the 5 stitches is a little bit more open, and of course the first one is very tight. Okay, so you can see the differences that we worked on. Now, when I go back to label these, I'm also going to label not just the number of the stitches, but I'm going to actually make a note on these ones that I loosened the tension. So I might say, this is stitch number 2 with a tension of 4. And I would do that for all of these. And then on these ones, I would say, I think I'm going to label these 5A, 5B, and 5C, and then say that they were tension level 3. Okay, I might just say tension level 4 on this one, and then tension level 3 on these ones here. Okay, so that's how I would label. I'll show you the final labeling, how I do that, just before the video ends. So and we're about to end this video because I just wanted to do the zigzag and the satin stitches for this. I don't want these videos to be too long. So that's the sewing part. I'm just going to talk to you a little bit now about putting them on a piece of cardstock and into a folder where you can keep all of the stitches for your review. Okay, so here we are, and we have finished the first section of stitches in the tutorial on basically how to use this machine, the Brother LX3817. And so I've done those first 5 stitches, and I've labeled everything. So remember the zigzag stitches, we have the 3 zigzag. I'm looking, I'm like, what is this? So we actually have 3 zigzag stitches. Remember that my video cut out on the first one, so I had to redo the second one. So, and then we have these satin stitches, which really are used for applique, sewing patches on, and all kinds of decorative purposes. Okay, so there are 6 actually in total. Let me count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in total, because there are 3 in the 5 section, which I've labeled here. 5A, 5B, and 5C. The S means stitch, that's what I just put, and then the T is for the tension. So remember that for the tension on the satin stitches, I turned it down to a 3 so that the fabric wouldn't be pulled and puckering. Okay, so I've labeled everything. So let's just have a look at this really quickly. I'm gonna put this up to the camera and let's see if it will focus a little bit better. Okay, so here I have S2, that's stitch 2, that's on the dial, it was number 2. And then the tension on this I had as 4. So the next one is stitch 3, and I also had that tension, T is for tension, as 4, and then so on, stitch 4 and tension 4 for that zigzag. And then here, remember I stopped halfway, that's why there's that section. Here I have S5A and tension at 4, but then I changed the tension, so that's why I put them all down here. I have S5A and tension 3. So stitch 5B, tension 3, stitch 5C, tension 3. So that's how I chose to label those. So now I have my cardstock, And I'm going to mount this for the notebook. And just as a quick review, this is the notebook. Remember, I talked about this in the intro while I'm trying to tell you that you can learn to sew for free. I know there are a lot of people that do videos here on YouTube, but I take it further, one step further, and I explain this notebook of samples that you can create, okay? And I explained that kind of at why I do that in the intro. So go back to the intro if you want to learn more about this notebook. So you can buy the actual patterns for the Apparel Arts Academy on my website at sewitLikeAman.com. Just look in the Apparel Arts Academy section or navigation up in the navigation menu. So you'll want to get one of these books so you can actually keep all your sewing samples together. That's how we taught it when I was teaching in colleges and universities. Okay, so all I need to do is center this on the cardstock, and I like to just tape it at the top so that I can flip it around, so I can flip it up to see the back side or the bobbin stitching. Okay, so I've got it taped on here, so now I can flip this up and I can still see underneath, and I can see how the underneath is stitching. Okay, so that's why I like to do that. And then I would normally label here somewhere on the side or on the bottom of the card exactly what it is so that I can see it on the edge. But because these are just the first stitches, I might go ahead and just label these zigzag stitches. And where did my pen go? I will label this Zig-Zag and Satin Stitches. Zig-Zag, Satin Stitches. And I'm going to put the machine on here as well. So I'm going to call this Brother LX3817. And the reason I did that is because I might also have other samples from other sewing machines that you have. And so you want to make sure that you understand what machine this is for, because the stitches and the tension on this machine may be different than the stitches and the tension on your other machines. So just be careful about that. So that's why I went ahead and labeled the machine there. Okay, so that's how I do that. And just one more thing, I got to put this in the protective cover to get it into a notebook. And that's not going in very well. There we go. Right in there, and then it goes right in my 3-ring binder just like that. So I want to thank you for watching. There are other videos to watch in this playlist, in this series, and I'm just sharing with you why my mind was changed about this sewing machine. Yeah, sometimes when we think about an inexpensive sewing machine, we don't think that it's a very good quality, but after using this one to teach a few students, my mind was changed. And so now for beginners or maybe people who are going off to college, they want a small, compact, but good machine to take to their dorm room. This one is great, and it's very economically priced. It's $85 on the shelf at Walmart. And I don't get paid by Walmart. I don't get paid by Brother to do this. I'm just sharing my experience. And the fact that this machine is under $100 is really, really a terrific buy. So just keep that in mind. And this is August 2022. So if you're thinking maybe you have a young person or another person in your life that you want to buy a sewing machine for, they're going away to college, or you have a young person in the house, they want to learn to sew, but you want to get a machine that doesn't break the bank, this is it. So $85, save $25 each month now, August, September, October, November. By November, if you save $25 a month, that's $100. You can get this machine, and that would be including all the taxes that you would need, right? And you might even have a few dollars left over to buy some fabric at the same time. Okay, so, and that's why my mind was changed about this machine. Continue to watch the other videos. I'm going to have practical videos about how to use the other stitches, and also I'm going to sew a full-on garment. I think it's going to be a shirt with this machine, just to show you the level of sewing that it does when we're looking at garments. Okay, so thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed, subscribe to my channel for other sewing tutorials, and as always, be well.